don't try to with me.
Now, what did your mom say?
I'm not trying to with you.
The boy you can see here is Ricky Tokars. His is the son of Fred and Sara Tokars. 2 years before this footage record, Ricky was celebrating Thanksgiving with his family. He lived with his younger brother Mike, his father Fred, and his mother Sara. They called the picture-perfect family. Ricky lives take a turn after that tragic incident happened on November 29th, 1992.
If my mom was still awake or if she was dead, and then I wake my brother up and
You woke your brother up?
yeah, and then I told him we had to go get help, and then we went to go get help.
After getting home from the holiday trip, both brothers watching their mother dead in front of them, police call Fred immediately a high-profile attorney.
I became very depressed. I started to think of the lifestyle that I was losing. Not only my wife, but my whole lifestyle.
As the police confirm that he is out of station, both kids are still in danger. But even after the death of Sara, she provided the clue of her murder.
He killed her, but he didn't silence her. She got the last word.
In 1992, the Tokars family lived a peaceful life in East Marietta, Georgia, a charming suburb of Atlanta. 6-year-old Ricky Tokars and his younger brother, 4-year-old Mike, shared their home with their loving parents, Sara and Fred, as well as their playful dog, Jake. Fred was a well-respected criminal defense attorney with his own practice, while Sara cherished her role as a stay-at-home mom, devoted to nurturing her 2 boys.
She was always there for us, always very compassionate and understanding.
As Thanksgiving approached, the family prepared for their annual trip to Florida to spend the holiday with Sara's family, the Ambruscos. The gatherings were always filled with warmth and joy, as Sara was one of 7 sisters, and each reunion was a celebration of family bonds. November 25th, 1992, the Tokars joined the Ambruscos for a Thanksgiving full of laughter and love. However, Fred had to leave early for a meeting in Alabama, so he assured Sara that he would return home separately. When November 29th arrived, it was time for the Tokars to head back to Georgia. As per tradition, the Ambruscos gathered together to wave goodbye, their hearts light with the joy of having shared yet another holiday together. Sara and her boys bid farewell to their family, eager to reunite with them soon for Christmas, and began their journey home.
My mom and dad said that as they were pulling away, Sara and the boys were singing back to them, "I'll be home for Christmas." And I never saw her again.
Late that night, the police receive a distressing call about 2 young boys who have appeared on a neighbor's porch, trembling and covered in blood. The children, visibly shaken, tearfully plead for help, saying their mother is in trouble. Responding immediately, the police arrive at the scene and begin their search. They discover a white car abandoned in a nearby ditch, and as they approach, their worst fears are confirmed. Inside the vehicle, they find the lifeless body of 39-year-old Sara Tokars. With very little information to start with, investigators begin a meticulous search for clues. They head to the Tokars' home, hoping to uncover something that might lead them to the person responsible. Initially, the scene hints at a burglary gone wrong, but as detectives delve deeper into the evidence, things don't add up. There are no signs of forced entry, and although the door leading from the patio to the kitchen is unlocked, they learn that the lock had already been broken prior to that night.
My first impression was that the scene was staged to make it look like a burglary, and it was not a burglary.
6-year-old Ricky and his younger brother Mike have just experienced something no child should ever endure. They are gripped by shock and confusion, but despite the overwhelming fear, Ricky finds the strength to help the police. With incredible courage, he shares what he remembers, describing how they were taken from their home before witnessing the unthinkable, his mother being shot.
The gunman was a black male. He really couldn't tell an age at that time.
Rick described the gun that he was armed with as a pirate gun. I don't know how much worse you can get.
The boys narrowly escape death, but they're far from safe. As the sole witnesses to the attack, the investigators are concerned that they could become the next targets. They question Ricky about his father's whereabouts, and he reveals that his dad is currently out of town. Detectives trace him to a motel almost 200 miles away in Alabama. They reach Fred Tokars and inform him of his wife's murder. Overcome with grief, Fred Tokars collapses, clearly devastated by the tragic news.
He was just a physical wreck, just crying uncontrollably. I remember thinking, this poor guy.
Ricky and Mike stay with their other relatives while their dad is away. As the family grapples with the shocking news, Ricky, his voice trembling, asks if they'll be able to see their mom in the morning. The room falls silent, the weight of the situation sinking in deeper.
I remember saying, when my mom gets out of the hospital, she said she's not going to be out of the hospital. She died.
I remember thinking our dad had been there to save the day.
Ricky and Mike are overwhelmed with emotion, struggling to grasp the reality that their mom is gone and her killer remains at large. The police are determined to bring her murderer to justice and provide the boys with some semblance of closure. However, they're puzzled by the lack of any apparent motive. No one can understand why anyone would want Sara dead. As the investigation deepens, detectives begin to consider a different angle. Could Sara's murder be connected to Fred's work instead?
We asked him about all his clients and his business partners, one after another. He listed business partners, clients for 3 hours. No idea who may have killed Sara.
Fred Tokars portrays his relationship with Sara as a picture-perfect marriage, but the facade begins to crack as suspicion quickly shifts toward him. Sara's family, already aware of the underlying tensions and turmoil in their relationship, reveals a much darker reality. They know more about the true nature of the marriage than Fred is willing to admit, casting doubt on his story and raising questions about his involvement in Sara's death. In 1985, 32-year-old Sara Ambrisco marries Fred Tokars, a rising district attorney. They seem to have an ideal life, welcoming 2 sons, Ricky and Mike, within 3 years. But the marriage begins to unravel when Fred transitions to a criminal defense attorney and opens his own private law practice.
I remember my father not being around very much. At the time, it's just dad works, and that's the kind of thing you accept.
Fred's frequent absences become routine, and Sara grows suspicious of his work. She confides in her sister about unsettling phone calls where the caller hangs up when she answers. Despite Fred's reassurances, by 1989, with Ricky only 3 years old, Sara's fears for her family are already coming true.
My brother found a pistol under the floorboard of the passenger seat of the car.
It scared her to death. Something was really wrong.
I think her first instinct was to protect my brother and I.
The gun doesn't fire, sparing Ricky, but Fred's dangerous, secretive lifestyle is now putting the boys at risk. Terrified by how much worse it could have been, Sara is gripped by fear. As Fred becomes controlling and abusive, the entire family suffers.
When you're asking me what memories I have of my parents when I was young, and really the only thing I can think of is fighting. It wasn't like a nice household.
She tried so hard in the beginning to try to make everything be even and at peace for the boys so that they didn't have to grow up in house of all fighting and yelling and things like that.
With Fred frequently absent, Sara suspects he's having an affair and considers divorce. But Fred warns her that she'll never get custody of the kids. Determined, Sara hires a private investigator who confirms Fred's infidelity. Still, she wants more evidence to protect her boys. Taking a risk, Sara searches Fred's off-limits office while he's away. There, she discovers incriminating documents that confirm her worst suspicions about him.
Sara told her sisters that she kept these documents as insurance in case they got a divorce and he tried to take custody of the children. Then she was going to use these documents to prove that Fred was into illegal activities.
She gave the papers to my sister Chrissy, and she told Chrissy, if anything happens to me, make sure to take those papers to the police.
After Sara's death in 1992, her sister Chrissy hands over incriminating documents to detectives, revealing that Fred was already under FBI investigation for money laundering. However, the documents don't link him to Sara's murder, leaving the case cold. Fred retains custody of Ricky and Mike, and the boys live in fear, haunted by the possibility of the killer still being out there. Meanwhile, Sara's father, John, rallies the family to keep fighting for the truth and the safety of her children. Desperate for answers, Sara's family and friends pool together a reward for any leads on her murder. Nearly a month after the attack, the reward pays off. A woman steps forward and calls the police, revealing her brother as the culprit, a man named Curtis Rower.
It was an anonymous telephone call, followed up by other telephone calls from related people in the Atlanta area who told us that we ought to be looking at a person by the name of Curtis Rower.
22-year-old Curtis Rower, a drug addict and small-time dealer, had been bragging about the murder to friends who tipped off the police. When Rower was arrested, he quickly confessed, revealing that he'd been hired to kill Sara Tokars for $5,000 by a 28-year-old businessman with a criminal record named Eddie Lawrence. Lawrence, in turn, became the crucial link that led investigators back to Fred Tokars.
Eddie Lawrence is nothing more than a street mutt in a suit. That's all he is. Con man. He's just a low-life mutt.
Eddie Lawrence is arrested the same day, but remains tight-lipped with the police, leaving them unconvinced they have the full story. As they dig deeper, they uncover a surprising connection. Lawrence had sought Fred Tokars' help as his attorney in January 1992 for a counterfeiting charge, and the two quickly became business partners. Tokars even invested in Lawrence's ventures, including a construction company. Police find it suspicious that during his initial interrogations, Fred never mentioned his business partner, Eddie Lawrence.
He told us a lot. Over 2 hours probably we talked to him. He told us a lot. But he never once mentioned Eddie Lawrence.
Detectives also uncover that before Sara's death, Fred took out 3 separate life insurance policies on her, totaling $1.75 million. Now convinced that Fred is involved in his wife's murder, investigators realize they must gather irrefutable evidence to prove his guilt. With Fred's wealth and connections, they know they need a rock-solid case before making an arrest.
We had to just be so careful with the boys because we felt that the boys were not safe with Fred.
Ricky and Mike live in constant fear, worried that someone might come for them again, though the real danger may lie with the man caring for them. Police know they can't move forward unless Fred's business partner, Eddie Lawrence, begins to talk. It's December 24th, 1992, the day after Curtis Rower and Eddie Lawrence are arrested. Fred and his boys are in Florida for Christmas. The Ambruscos, hoping to lift the boys' spirits, offer to take them out, but Fred declines, saying he needs to rest at the motel. As the hours pass with no word from Fred, Sara's father, John, becomes concerned. He goes to check on Fred, but when there's no response to his knock, he calls the manager to unlock the door.
Fred's suicide attempt showed 2 things. One, that he was involved and that he was guilty and he knew that they were closing in on him. And 2, that we had to just be so careful with the boys because we felt that the boys were not safe with Fred.
Months pass with no new developments until July 1993. 8 months after Sara's murder, Eddie Lawrence finally breaks his silence. He confesses that Fred Tokars hired him to kill Sara because she knew too much about his criminal activities. Unable to do it himself, Lawrence hired Curtis Rower to carry out the deadly task.
Eddie even went to Fred and said, why don't you just divorce the woman? Fred said, that's not going to do. That's not going to keep her quiet. She knows too much. And Eddie would even say, what about your 2 sons? That's when Fred said, well, they'll get over it. They're 4 and 6 years old. They'll get over it. We knew that we were dealing with Fred being the mastermind behind his wife's murder.
On August 25th, 1993, nearly 9 months after Sara's murder, detectives decide to exploit Fred's frustration with the relentless media attention. They pose as journalists and gather around his building, hoping to lure him out. Their plan works and agitated Fred steps outside to confront the supposed reporters. The moment he's outside, away from the boys, police seize the opportunity and make the arrest, ensuring he can no longer pose a threat to his children.
Breathe such a sigh of relief. We're like, oh my God, because in the end, that's all Sara cared about.
The kids are finally safe, but in 1995, Ricky must face his mom's killer to ensure justice. 3 men are behind bars for Sara Tokars' murder her husband Fred, his associate Eddie Lawrence, and the hitman, Curtis Rower. Each faces a separate trial. Rower tries to claim Sara's death was an accident, saying Lawrence grabbed the gun after they pulled over, causing it to go off. To refute this, Ricky must relive that horrific night to help convict the killers. On November 29, 1992, around 10 p.m., Sara pulls into their Atlanta driveway. Exhausted from a long day of travel, Mike sleeps in the back seat while Sara takes Ricky and their dog inside. As she opens the door, a dark house greets her. Suddenly, a man with a gun jumps in front of her, ordering them back outside. Pleading for their safety, Sara gets back in the car with Ricky beside her. The man, sitting behind her with the gun pointed at her head, traps them all in a nightmare, as Mike remains unaware, still asleep in the back seat.
Being super uncomfortable in that front seat. Told my mom to drive. My mom started driving. He was doing like a play-by-play, like turn here, turn there. My mom was pleading with him, just let us go. But to be honest, I didn't really know like what was going on.
The car veers out of control, eventually crashing into a ditch. Ricky hits his head in a sudden stop, and the 2 little boys are left alone beside their mother's lifeless body. For a moment, Ricky is paralyzed with shock. Remembering his mom's lesson about the dangers of leaving a car running, he reaches over and turns off the engine.
I remember, like shaking her, like, hey, Mom, wake up, we gotta go, I didn't think she was dead. I thought she was gonna go to the hospital and get fixed up, and then things were gonna go back to normal. I don't even think a 6-year-old could grasp it. the enormity of it.
Realizing his mom isn't moving, Ricky assumes she's hurt. He unbuckles, steps out, and helps his little brother out of the car. Hand in hand, they spot lights in the distance and run towards them. They reach a nearby house, and a man answers the door, shocked to see the boys covered in blood. He immediately calls the police. On February 27, 1995, now 8-year-old Ricky bravely testifies against the man who shot his mother. He recalls the gunman's words and the moments after the attack.
Don't try to with me.
Now, what did your mom say?
I'm not trying to with you. If my mom was still awake or she was dead, and then I wake my brother up and
You woke your brother up?
yeah, and then I told him we have to go get help, and then he went to go get help.
Despite the defense questioning his memory, Ricky stands firm, showing remarkable courage. With Ricky's powerful testimony, Curtis Rower is sentenced to life without parole, ensuring he can never harm anyone again. 2 years later, during his father's trial, Ricky doesn't have to face Fred in court. Instead, a full transcript of his testimony is read to the jury.
We, the jury, find beyond a reasonable doubt that the offender caused or directed another to commit murder.
Fred Tokars and Eddie Lawrence are both sentenced to life in prison. Following Fred's arrest, Ricky and Mike move in with the Ambrusco family. Sara's parents raise the boys with love and support, and the children have no contact with their father.
I have not spoken with my father since he was found guilty, and no, I don't think I ever will. He hasn't been my father for a long time.
If I was a powerful lawyer in Atlanta and I had this crazy idea to kill my wife in front of her 2 boys, I would be so torn up. I try to spend the rest of my life trying to ask for forgiveness and trying to make it right. That's just me, though. So I don't forgive Fred, and I probably never will, and I'm fine with that.
People process trauma in many ways. Ricky, while unable to forgive his father, refuses to let him control his life. Instead, he cherishes the loving memories of his mother. Despite the tragic end to her life, Sara succeeded in protecting her children from harm, which was her greatest priority.
He killed her, but he didn't silence her. She was able to get the evidence of what he was doing and get it to the right people before she was killed. She got the last word.
Today, Ricky is surrounded by his loving family. They continue to celebrate the holidays and cherish their time together, honoring the traditions Sara always upheld.